Greetings, fellow reverb enthusiasts. I'm Drew Mazurek, and welcome back to another Spotlight. In this video, I want to spotlight two of my favorite effects of all time, the EMT 140 and the EMT 250. To do that, I'm going to use the UAD EMT 140 Classic Plate Reverberator, which is an effect that everyone should have and use. And I'm going to show you the UAD EMT 250 Classic Electronic Reverb, which is primarily known as the world's first digital reverb, but it also does lots of other cool effects that I'm going to show you in this video. I've had extensive experience with both of these in the real world, which in the case of the 250 is quite rare considering that they only made a few hundred of them. And since we just released both of these as native plugins, we also updated the interface for the 140 and we added high resolution graphics to the 250. I thought it was a great time to show you how I like to use these effects. I'm going to give you a full detailed walkthrough of every parameter and control and mix in some tips and tricks along the way. So make sure you're watching this video all the way to the end. But for now, as always, I want to jump to some sound examples right here at the front of the video so that you don't have to wait to hear these plugins in action. Afterwards, we'll circle back and dig in deeper. Let's get started. So I have a ton of examples to share with you here, and I'm going to do this somewhat quickly. The idea is to let you hear things fast. So I'll talk about the settings used for each example, and then in the full walkthrough, we'll go through each parameter in detail. Sound good? Let's go. So my first example is a cool live hip hop track. And I'm gonna show you two sections, the intro and then another section later on with different instruments. The intro is drums, bass, percussion, a guitar part, and then some vocals. And let me start off by turning off all the effects and just playing you the dry section. Bone dry, no effects.
Yeah, a lot goes into staring at this clock. I hate this job that I got. I hate these floors that I mop. These filthy walls that I wash. If I going, ain't going in on time. Today, well, I'm contemplating calling out. Cause I got ambitions and visions of balling out. My employer called the shots, well, I'm about to call them now.
So it's sounding really good. I'm liking the tones, I'm liking the blends, but it's a little dry and maybe lacking a little bit of interest and depth. So let me go ahead and turn on all of my effects, which is going to be two or three instances of the 250 and one instance of the 140. Let me turn that all on and then we'll give that a listen.
Yeah, a lot goes into staring at this clock. I hate this job that I got. I hate these floors that I mop. These filthy walls that I wash. If I going, ain't going in on time. Today, well, I'm contemplating calling out. Cause I got ambitions and visions of balling out. My employer called the shots, well, I'm about to call them now.
So that's quite a transformation, especially to the snare drum and the guitar. Percussion and vocal, a little more subtle, but let's break it down and let's look at the drums first. So I've got an instance of the 250 in reverb mode. It's set pretty fast and I'm going to solo up the drums and let's mute the reverb. I'll play it dry and then I'll add it halfway through. So super poppy, kind of dark and wide, kind of an 80s vibe here. Really brought out that snare, brought out those ghost notes as well. Now I put it directly on the snare. I put this send directly on the snare. That way the kick and the overhead stayed pretty dry, but I could have done it added it to the overheads and it would have made the entire drum kit more wet. But really added a nice pop to that snare drum that I'm really digging. Okay, so let's move over to the right and look at our second example. This one is utilizing the 140 and this one's super subtle. We'll do the same thing. Let me play it for you dry and I'll add it halfway through. I'm using plate A, pretty short, and let's listen. So it's a simple little Cabasa part. Without the 140, it's dry and kind of short, and I've got it panned a little bit to 10 o'clock. But when I add that 140, it gets a little shimmer to it. It gets wider, it gets elongated, and the other side of your headphones, if you're listening to headphones, just kind of filled out with that reverb. So subtle, but meaningful in adding depth. Okay, let's keep going. And I'm gonna move over to the right, and this time we're gonna talk about the guitar, because this was quite a transformation. Now I'm using the 250 and I'm in chorus mode. So I wanted to highlight this. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. I'm gonna turn it off, and halfway through I'll turn it on, and then we'll talk about it. So lots to discuss here. Right off the bat, you're going to notice that, of course, probably the most obvious thing is the chorus effect and the width that was added. I'm in stereo chorus mode here. More on that in a second. But the other thing I want to draw your attention to is the change in the tone. Not only are we adding a chorus effect, but the 250, we've modeled it end to end, including the conversion. So it's kind of a tone box as well as an effects processor. So we took that kind of boring mono-ish guitar, and we widened it and gave it interest and warmed up the sound in a really cool way. And then, of course, that super cool movement from the chorus. And I got your first tip for you here, and it's kind of a cryptic one. We're going to use this front and rear output toggle to transform this stereo course into a mono course. Pretty wild. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to hit play again, and then I'm going to toggle the front rear output knob or toggle switch, and we're going to transform that from stereo to mono. Check it out. So quite a transformation on this guitar. We've widened it, we've warmed up its tone, and we learned our first tip, which is that chorus mode has a stereo mode and a mono mode. All right, let's move on to the lead vocal, and I got a couple of things to show you here. Let's start off with an instance of the 250 in reverb mode, even shorter than that drum reverb. And the idea here is that I want to just add bigness and width and depth to the vocal without it reading reverb. And the 250 is amazing at that. So let me do the same thing. I'm going to solo it up, play it without, and add it halfway through.
Yeah, a lot goes into staring at this clock. I hate this job that I got. I hate these floors that I mop. These filthy walls that I wash. If I go in, ain't going in on time.
So if you're wearing headphones, that vocal went from dead center and bone dry to just being bigger and larger and wider. So reverb's not always about hearing the tail, right? He just sounds bigger and more authoritative. Re-listen to that full example at the beginning of this section and you'll see what I'm talking about. So that's really cool. And then I got a second thing for you here. I wanted to feature the 250 in echo mode. So down here, I've got this green button pressed and we're in echo mode. This is a super cool mono repeating echo, and it's awesome for old school delay throws. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And I'm gonna give you another little tip here. And we're back to using this front and rear button, that these are kind of cryptic little things that you might not know about. And the idea here is that the front rear button toggles a mute to the input of the delay circuit. Let me show you what I mean. You'll get what I'm saying. So I'm gonna play this, and in real time, I'm gonna just add some throws.
Yeah, a lot goes into staring at this clock. I hate this job that I got. I hate these floors that I mop. These filthy walls that I wash.
So you can automate that with your DAW's automation system, and it just gives you that like super cool old school mono repeating echo throws, and it's a lot of fun. Make sure you check that out. All right, one last example to show you here, and we're going to use the 250 again in space mode. And for me, it comes up occasionally where a song just ends a little bit too abruptly, and you got to do something to make it interesting. Of course, any reverb can be used to add a tail onto something, but what if you want to do something a little bit more fun and a little bit more interesting? Let me show you what I've got going on here, and I'm going to go to the end of the song, and I'm going to play you with this effect off first so that you can hear how this end is a little bit abrupt. Right? Just kind of goes away. It's a little abrupt. You know, I could put any reverb tail on it, but let's have some fun here. Space mode. What is it? Well, in the manual, we describe it as what would reverb be like if it happened in outer space? So let's go ahead and put this on this little pulsing synth. And I'm using Luna's automation system here to increase the send. And let me just play it for you. It tells the whole story. Pretty cool, right? It's a pretty cool way to end a song. Not going to work every time. You want to pull it out of your bag of tricks once in a while, and you'll probably get a smile from some people's faces. Alrighty, on to the next set of examples. All right, so for this set of examples, I'm on the same song, but I've moved over to the chorus. And I've actually muted the vocal because we got some other instruments that have entered the song and I want to feature them. So let's do the same thing. I'm going to turn off all the effects, no 140, no 250, and I'm going to play you just the dry, raw mix. Let's check that out. So again, a nice blend. It's grooving pretty good, but it is, you know, it's dry, lacking a little bit of interest, especially those trombones. Let me play that again, and then halfway through, I will turn on where I ended up with all of my effects. Let's check that out. So again, quite a transformation, especially the trombones and those guitars. Let's break it down. So let me start from left to right. And drums I'm not going to do again because they didn't really change. The percussion, we can take a quick look at this in solo because we had some congas that got added. So let's go ahead and listen to that. I'm going to turn off the 140 plate, and then I'll put it on halfway through. So super subtle, just adding that tail and depth and dimension to the Cabasa now, as well as the congas that have entered. Let's get into the meat of stuff. Let's go over here to guitar 2 and let's talk about what we did here. This is an instance of the 250, and here we're in delay mode. Delay mode is a stereo slap delay, and it doesn't have a feedback or repeats. We use echo mode for that, as I showed you earlier. So this is my favorite slap echo, and you're going to hear what it does to this guitar. So let me start off with it off, and you can hear what this guitar is doing, and then I'll put it on halfway through. Just a super cool slap, adds a lot of interest in the ears. And if you're in headphones, then that guitar just got more interesting to listen to. All right, let's move on to guitar 5. And here I'm back to the 140. I'm looking for that shimmer. I'm looking for that tail. And let me go ahead and do the same thing. I'll turn it off, turn it on halfway through. So yeah, man, you gotta love that. I mean, who doesn't like a nice plate to elongate and extend that guitar part? So let's take a look at these trombone parts. they were utterly transformed by the 140. So let me solo them up for you. And we're going to turn off the effects. And I'm going to bring up this instance of the 140. And we're going to do the same thing. Play it dry, and I'll add it halfway through. Let's check it out. Those are some beefy trombone parts, and adding the 140 to them really brought out that beefiness and gave them a huge presence in this mix. Okay, let's switch songs and explore some more examples. Okay, so we've switched songs and I got some more lead vocal examples for you. This is a mid-tempo pop song, female vocal, and I thought it would be interesting to compare the 140, the 250, and then maybe something like Capital Chambers so that we can kind of hear these side by side. So let me start by, let's solo this lead vocal, and let me just play for you bone dry so that you can hear our starting point.
And you only want her in the winter.
So bone dry, super breathy, emotional lead vocal performance. Not going to cut it in a mix when it's that dry and flat. Let me play you that same section, and let's start with the 140. I'm using plate A, set pretty long, input filter to 360, and let's just give that a listen.
And you only want her in the winter when your shadow covers all that glitters.
Right, so classic 140 plate sound, width, density, shimmer, shimmery top end, just beautiful, right? Okay, so let's switch over to the 250 and I'll play the same section. Now here I've got it set, the time is about the same. I am emphasizing the bottom a little bit and trimming the top a little. This is how I like to use the 250. So it goes for a warmer, darker sound. Let me play that for you.
And you only want her in the winter when your shadow covers all that glitters.
So similar vibe, we're talking about width and smoothness and density, but a little darker and more reserved. This is how I like to use the 250. And then lastly, let's go ahead and just for the heck of it, let's play that same section with Capital Chambers, and then we'll talk about it.
And you only want her in the winter when your shadow covers all that glitters.
So you'll notice with Capital Chambers and even rooms and halls do this for sure. They're more about the front to back depth. They sound amazing and they do a great job in a lot of instances. But I did want to draw the distinction between that front to back depth and then with the plates. The plates were about, for my ear, it's like side to side. I like that side to side width and density that plates give. And then Capital Chambers, really great with front to back dimensionality. So anyway, I wanted to do this little comparison here. Hopefully this gives you an idea of how and when you might choose to use any one of these given reverbs. All right, on to the next example. For this example, we're on the same song and we're still talking about the chorus, but I've moved over to the drums. It is a mid-tempo song, so I really want to elongate that snare. And let me just play you the finished result and then we can unpack it. Check it out.
And you only want her in the winter when your shadow covers all that glitters.
So the idea here is I really wanted to elongate that snare. And to do that, I took a snare sample from the track and I just pasted it in the chorus. So let me actually turn these off so that you can hear what I started with, right? So let me play just a snippet of that. that's literally the starting point, right? That little soft, wimpy snare. So here's what I'm doing. And here's another pro tip for you here. I do this quite often in thick, dense mixes. So I'm using the 140 and I'm using plate A, and I've got it set real long, and that's cool. That's great. It's elongating it. But in a dense mix, even that tail will sometimes not cut through. And this is something I do quite regularly. And I love the 175 for this. It's just beautiful. It's dark. And it has this high gain mode, which drives a lot of signal into the gain reduction circuit, which is great for this. It's great for all sorts of stuff. But anyway, and then I'm driving the input and I've got the output driven back. And let me solo this up for you. And then I'm going to play it for you. Let me play it without the 175, and then I'll add the 175 halfway through. So it's doing some cool stuff there. Number one, you can hear it grabbing, and then the release time adds an explosiveness to the reverb. And then of course, just the compression itself is adding density into the mix. So that is a really cool tip for you to elongate reverbs, make them more present, bring them forward in a mix. And I do it quite a lot, so hopefully you found that useful. All right, on to the next example. Okay, so next up is an example that highlights the EMT 250's phase mode or phaser mode. This is an amazing, super cool classic phaser, and I've got it in a pretty classic application here, which is, hey, let's put a phaser on the whole song. This is super fun. Be sure to try it. It also, I'm using Luna's automation system to do this. You're going to see the levers move around here, and let's just give it a listen, and I think it all speaks for itself. Let's check it out. Just a super cool ear tickling phaser. I automated the time and I've automated the pre-delay. Is it over the top? Yeah, but it's super cool. And I just wanted to show you that you have fun with that and explore all sorts of spots where that would be a cool effect. All right, on to the next one. So for my final set of examples, I told you I had a lot of examples for you. We're going to focus on the 140. I've been giving the 250 a lot of love. I want to circle back and give the 140 some love and give you some more tips and tricks. So cool stuff here. Let me, as usual, start off by just letting you hear the raw acoustic guitar sound so that you can see what we're starting with. It's a little bit mid-rangey, maybe lacking a little bit of body, and it's mono, so it's down the center. And so I've got a couple of treatments for you and a couple of tricks here. So let's walk through this. Let me start with the first instance of 140 here. You'll notice I've got a preset that I've built called Bright and Wide. And so I'm using plate A, but I've got it set really, really short. The 140, for me, I do this with vocals all the time. It's the best vocal doubler, right? Just any of these plates set to their minimum, it just creates width, and they're just the best doubler or the best widener I like to use. I do have the input filter set to 360. This is keeping bottom end from getting out of or getting into the plate rather. And then over here in the EQ section, you'll notice I'm pegging the top end. I'm pegging the top end. And I want to make this super duper bright. And so let's go ahead and listen to that. I'm going to start with it off and then I'll add it on halfway through. Check it out. You hear how short that tail is. doesn't really read reverb, but it's just bright, wide goodness, right? Okay, let's go ahead. Let's swing the pendulum the other way. I've got a preset I built called Dark and Mono. Let me walk you through this. I'm also using Plate A, but you'll see it's set longer. And then the input filter, I have it off. This is letting all the low end that there is into the plate. And so it's going to be a fuller, richer sound. And then a couple of things that I've not done yet is in the stereo section. I have it set to 0. We can go full stereo or we can collapse to mono. And I've got it collapsed to mono, hence the name Dark and Mono. And then here's something else I haven't shown yet, the modulation section. I'm adding modulation to this reverb that adds a little bit of a pitch movement to it. It's interest, we like that. It adds variety and adds depth. And then in the EQ section, I'm kind of doing the opposite. I'm cutting highs, adding lows. So this preset is really the antithesis of that other preset. And let's do the same thing. Let me play it for you, and then halfway through, I'll turn it on. A longer tail, and in the center image. If you've got headphones, that tail stayed down the center. And this is cool because a thin sound, I might want to kind of thicken the low end in the center image only. We also got some other cool things here. Let me show you, give you a couple of ideas to try, a couple of tips here. The balance control. I haven't talked about the balance control yet. Let's take this instance, let's take this example and do that. So I'm gonna hit play here, and you tell me if this sounds cool or not. I think it's pretty cool to move this reverb around. Check it out. For me, lots of cool textures and cool vibes to have there. You can imagine automating that so that went back and forth, and that acoustic guitar moved and morphed into your song. Pretty cool stuff. Just giving you some ideas to try here. And then guess what? Here's what we're gonna do, in case you didn't see it coming already. Why not combine the two of these together, right? Let's get the benefits of both. Let's have Dark and Mono. Let's reinforce the bottom end in the stereo, in the center of our stereo image. And then let's tickle our ears with the shimmery top end. So let me go ahead and let's turn them off, and we'll play it without, and I'll put them both on, off, on, off. Check it out. And they really are working well together. Let me play it again, and I'm gonna turn on and off just Dark and Mono, and you'll hear that change in the center image. Check it out. So you could totally hear that the center image is thick and elongated, and then the bright stereo is still cutting through. It's crazy the number of options that you have with these two plugins. It's amazing how much heavy lifting you can accomplish with just two of them. So hopefully I have shown you that in these examples. And so let's move on. Now that we've heard them in action, let's do a full walkthrough of all the controls so that you can get good at using these tools. And let's start with the 140. It's a classic mechanical reverb, meaning that it achieves its effect by vibrating a large sheet of steel using a voice coil. This is not unlike the way a speaker uses a voice coil to vibrate the cone and excite the air molecules. Here, we're exciting the molecules of the steel plate. They're emanating outward throughout the steel and getting picked up by contact transducers and converted back to voltage. What's unique here, unlike room reverbs, is that there are no early reflections. You get a whip-like attack that is an instantly diffused sound that is shimmery in the top end from the steel, yet dense and beautiful, even though it doesn't sound that natural when compared to a room reverb. We humans love this effect. And the UAD plugin expertly models the entire range of the damper as it dramatically morphs the frequency response and the decay time. All right, let's get into that tour. Starting on the left-hand side of the plugin, we have our plate select area. And we have a couple of options here. I can click and drag to adjust the switch, or I can click directly on the letters themselves, or my personal favorite, which is to click on the frame surrounding each plate's reverb time. You'll also notice that the little light bulb goes on, so you always know which plate you are using. And we've got three distinct plates here. Plate A and B are the original plates, the original EMT electronics. They had not been serviced. We wanted to capture the true vintage vibe of these plates. And then plate C has the more modern, upgraded Martech electronics, and it had been recently serviced and tensioned. Plates can be tensioned. It's not unlike tuning a drum. So you really do have three distinct and different plates here at your disposal. By the way, if you own pure plate already, you own plate B. So upgrading to the EMT 140 gets you these two very distinct plates. Plate C is the most hi-fi, the most frequency rich, the most, extended frequency plate. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on here, a lot of variability that you can get between these three plates. So moving on to the reverb time, we have a couple of options here as well. We can simply click and drag to adjust the little red needle to set the time. We can click in the actual interface to directly set the time. And then we also have the option of either clicking the minus and plus buttons individually or clicking and holding, which simulates what you would have done with the real one. You'd press the button and the motor would spool and adjust the damper. So it's kind of a cool little retro effect. Below that is the input filter section. And as I mentioned previously, there were original EMT electronics and then the Martech electronics. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that some of these numbers are black and some of the numbers are red. The black numbers represent the original EMT electronics, and this was a high-pass filter set to 80 hertz, and you could turn it off or set it to -4, -10, or -16. And then the red numbers represent the Martech electronics, and this is a shelving filter, not a high-pass filter, and it's a 12 dB shelving filter, and of course, you can set it to whichever frequency you like. Similar to the reverb section, you can click and drag, or you can simply click on the numbers to get to the settings you want quickly. Moving to the right, we have the stereo section, which we just heard in the last set of examples. And this is plugin exclusive. And in fact, everything from here over is plugin exclusive. The real hardware would have just had the plate itself and then the electronics with whatever input filter it was fitted with. So everything from here on out, plugin exclusive, and that is really awesome. And the stereo section allows us to do some really cool things. In the last example, you saw me collapsing the plate to mono and then using the balance control to shift the image and create movement and a lot of interest. So lots of cool stuff to explore here in the stereo section. We also have click zones here, by the way. You can click on 0, you can click on 100, and you can click on 50 as well. And the same, of course, holds true for the balance section. Now, in the center section, two controls to point out. They do the same thing. Click on the red light, and that's the internal bypass, or you can toggle the toggle switch, also the internal bypass. Next up is the mod section. You also just saw me feature that in the last set of examples. It's a common thing to modulate reverbs. There's a technical reason for it, to keep them from ringing in certain instances, but there's also an artistic reason for doing it. By modulating the delay of the reverb, it creates a Doppler effect, and this just creates interest and it makes a reverb a little bit more interesting to our ears. You saw me use that in the low end example for the acoustic guitar, and it just adds a little bit of depth and dimension. So make sure you play around with that. And again, we have rate and we have depth. If you put the rate all the way down and the depth all the way down, then that's the same as bypass. And of course, we have some click zones here that allow you to get to some various points quickly, or you click and drag as you see fit. Okay, moving over to the right, the equalizer section. You saw this get used in several of my examples. This is a really great feature of the plugin. When I would use real plate reverbs, I would have to bring the plate return up onto 2 faders of the console as opposed to the effects return in order to get EQ and in order to get dynamics and compression like I showed you in some of these examples. So it's really, that wasted 2 channels on the console, right? And this was a really convenient way of being able to tone shape the output of the reverb. Keep in mind that this EQ is post-plate. So you're changing the frequency content of the plate itself, unlike the input filter. The input filter is removing frequencies prior to the signal getting into the plate, different applications. So here we have, you have to put it in circuit, of course, and they are shelving filters, as you can see from these icons. These are the icons. These icons mean shelving filters. And we have a low shelf and a high shelf, and we have the usual click zones where you can get to the positions you want to go to quickly, and otherwise you're clicking and dragging. Clicking on 0 brings everybody back to their default state. So make sure you check that out to shape your reverbs. All right, moving on to the right, we have a super cool retro VU meter here. This is the output level of the plate. Pretty straightforward. You saw that in action throughout the examples. Now below that, in the bottom right-hand corner, super important area, the blend section. And the first thing I should talk about is this button right here, the wet solo button. You saw me using these effects in 2 different configurations, a send and return configuration, which is the thing you should be doing most of the time with time-based effects. So in those instances, the wet solo button was lit, and that means that only effect will come out of the processor. But there were a few instances, and there are some instances where you want to insert a time-based effect directly on a track. You notice I did that when it was a one-off, right? When I was applying effects to those guitars that were bespoke effects to that track, then I just put it right on there, and you would turn off the wet solo button and then adjust your wet dry blend with that. So that's an important thing to make sure you're setting correctly. Now, to the left of that, and lastly, we have our pre-delay setting. This is a delay that's inserted in between the incoming signal and the onset of the reverb. This is a great adjustment to have. There are times where you don't want any pre-delay and you want the reverb to just fully extend the sound itself. In other words, fuse with the original. But there are times where if you put a little pre-delay and you create a little bit of space in between the signal and the onset of its reverb, psychoacoustically, that creates clarity and separation and definition. Again, in the old days, we would have to come out of the patch bay and go into a PCM 42 and then into the plate. It was actually kind of a cool effect because you could hit that PCM 42 hard and spank the plate and get some really cool effects. But thankfully, we have that now in the plugin, and we can adjust that right there. Okay, so let's hop over to the 250. Released in 1976, it was the world's first digital reverb, and the UAD plugin uses the same algorithms as the real thing. We got a lot to cover, so let's keep it moving. So let's start in the upper left-hand corner, and the first thing I want to show you, pretty simple, the red EMT logo. This is the internal bypass of the plugin, just like we saw with the EMT 140. Now below that, we have a register light and then 0, -6, and -12. This is super unique to this piece. The register light in modern terms is a clip indicator, but you have to remember that this device was designed before we had the standard of 0 dB FS or 0 dB full scale. So this unit had 6 dB of headroom above 0. And what's really cool and is a tip for you here is that we modeled the input electronics and the A to D conversion. So similar to what I just mentioned about the 140 and using a PCM42 to spank the plate, you can hit this plugin harder than you can with other digital reverbs because we have modeled the non-linearities there. So it's really cool. You heard it with the guitar examples that it was kind of changing the tone. So this is a tone box, not just an effects box. Now, below that, we have a noise on and off switch. Everything's got noise. Early digital devices in particular had noise. So guess what? We modeled it, right? But we're giving you the option to turn it off here with this button. Okay, now let's move over to the right. And I want to start off by talking about these levers. And the levers change depending on what mode you're in. So let's start with the default mode of reverb. So we have a white, lever number 1 is white. And of course we can click and drag to move it up, and we can click over here and we've got the red reverb button. So when you're in reverb mode, the default mode, you are going to read the left-hand side with the red LEDs, and you're going to set your reverb time there. Now, moving over to the right, let's talk about levers 2 and 3 when in reverb mode. And when in reverb mode, you're going to use the left-hand legend. You're going to read the red LEDs. And as you can see here, look at this icon. That's the icon for a shelving filter. So lever 2 is your low end shaper. So you can leave it at 1x and it'll be standard low end. You can drop it to 0.5, which will reduce low end in the reverb. And then of course you can go 0.5 and 2x. And of course I can click and drag as well as click directly on the LEDs. Now moving to lever 3. Lever 3, in reverb mode, we are also looking at the red LEDs. And if you look at this icon right here, that is a low pass filter. So this is your high frequency shaping. When it's set to max, that means that you've got maximum amount of top end. And then I can cut it in half, minus, or 0.3 or 0.25. So lever 2, lever 3 are your tone shapers, similar to what we saw in the 140. So lever 4 here is pre-delay. You can see that you've only got one legend, green LEDs on the right. And again, we can click and drag. It's listed in milliseconds, 0, 20, 40, and 60. This will always be pre-delay regardless of what mode you're in. Okay, now while we're over here, let's go ahead and cover wet solo and wet and dry, because they're very similar to what we just discussed with the 140. So wet solo is, there's a little bit of a difference here though. Wet solo is how you want to have the 250 set when you're in a send and return configuration, just like I'd mentioned with the 140. And then of course, when you insert it directly onto tracks, you can turn that off and use the wet dry. The one difference here is that some of the modes like the phaser mode, they actually sound best and you'll want to run them in wet solo regardless, even if you've inserted it directly onto the track. So a little bit of nuance here with the wet solo and wet dry, but otherwise pretty standard functionality here. Okay, so let's circle back over to the left and switch from reverb mode to delay mode. And in delay mode, the first 3 levers change function. Lever 4, still pre-delay, nothing to talk about there. Lever 1 now has switched from the red LEDs to the green LEDs and is adjusting the delay time, the coarse delay time. And then lever 2 is also switched over to the green LEDs, and it is the fine tuning of the delay time. Now, this is a stereo slap delay. It doesn't have a feedback circuit, but you do have a left channel and a right channel. So that's where lever 3 comes into play. I want you to pay attention to the R and the L. So right now I have set the right channel's time to be 160 plus 10. So 170 milliseconds, by the way, subject to the pre-delay before that kicks in. And then if I switch over to the left, I can set that independently. And let's say I want that one to be 160 and 15. So as I toggle back and forth between these two, that is the differential between my left and right delays. This is a great way to get really quick slaps. And then of course, as mentioned, the pre-delay comes in front of all of those. So that is the delay circuit. Or the delay mode, and it's amazing for slap echoes like I showed in the examples. All right, so let's jump over to echo mode since it's kind of related to delay mode. So let's talk about what echo mode is. Echo mode is a mono delay that does have a feedback circuit. In the audio examples, you saw me using it to make those old school delay throws. It's awesome at that. So delay mode, great for slaps. Echo mode, great for old school mono delays. And so lever number 1 stays the same. It's still your coarse adjustment. Lever number 2 stays the same. It's your fine tuning adjustment. Lever 4 stays the same, pre-delay. So let's talk about lever 3. You'll notice that lever 3 is back to being on the left-hand side, and it's now our tone shaping, or it's really the high frequency damping. So when I set it all the way up, it lets the most high end through, which goes into the feedback circuit and extends the delays. So as I turn this down, you're going to get less repeats and it kind of tapers off the delay. So it's really cool for those delay throws like I did in the beginning, and it is mono. And don't forget about our little pro tip here, where the front to rear button or the front to rear toggle switch acts as a mute switch to the input of the delay. We'll talk a little bit more about that front rear toggle switch later on in this walkthrough. Okay, so let's switch over from echo mode to coarse mode. And the first thing I want you to notice is that lever 1 and 2 don't do anything. You can ignore them. Lever 4, still pre-delay, still applies here with chorus. And then lever number 3, I want you to read the right side legend. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 different coarse algorithms or coarse modes. And the first 2 are simpler coarse modes, and then we get to be a little bit more of a complex sound. So be sure to play around with them and decide which one works for you. And then don't forget, we also have our front and rear output toggle, which, as I showed in the examples, is stereo versus mono. So next up, let's cover space mode. I showed you this in the audio examples as a way of sort of adding a tail to the end of a song. This is kind of a specialized mode that you'll get to, pull out of your back pocket once in a while. I mentioned in the manual that we call it, what would happen if reverb occurred in outer space? And it's just a really long delay time of all frequencies. The only thing to add here really is that we do have pre-delay, which is still active here. And then we do have the front and rear output toggle, which gives it just a slightly different flavor, whether you're on the front or on the rear. Pretty subtle, but go ahead and check that out. So that brings us to phase mode. We did a really cool demo here where we used this on an entire mix. So let's go ahead and switch over to phase mode. And a couple things you'll notice: levers 2 and 3 don't do anything. Lever 4 is still pre-delay. Now, lever 1 is a bit of a special case. We're looking at the right-hand side and we're looking at green LEDs, but that's not actually what's going on here. It's not 0 to 300 milliseconds. It's actually 0 to 15 milliseconds. And unlike other phasers that modulate this, the 250's phaser does not. It's static. So you'll notice in the sound example that I used automation to adjust the delay time up and down, and then I also adjusted the pre-delay. So you're literally, think of it as a phaser where you create the modulation, you create the motion. You can, of course, use it without automation and create just sort of static phase shifts. Also, a tip for you here: when using the 250 in phase mode, you're pretty much always going to want to have wet solo engaged because it's utilizing the differential between the left input and the right input. Play around with it. and have some fun with it. And as you could hear in that audio example, my favorite application for it is to just do that beautiful ooey gooey whole mix phaser vibe that I showed in those examples. One more thing to cover before we wrap things up, and that's a little bit more info on the front rear output toggle switch that I have featured several times in this video. The original EMT hardware had separate front and rear outputs since it supported quadraphonic sound, which was all the rage during this time period. So even though it's a stereo-only plugin, we thought we would take advantage of this and add some of the cool features you've seen me show in this video. So you'll notice in phase mode and space mode, there's a yellow ring around the front rear output toggle switch, letting you know that there are alternate sounds to be had. In phase mode, switching to the rear outputs gets you a different comb filter phase. And as I mentioned in the video, for space mode, the rear output is a slightly different effect. For the other modes that don't have the yellow ring, like delay, the rear turns it into a mono delay. And for chorus, the rear turns it into a mono chorus, as I showed. And in echo mode, the switch mutes the input to the delay, allowing for those cool throws. So there you have it, a full walkthrough of all the features and controls, a bunch of audio examples to inspire you and give you ideas to try on your tracks, and a few tips and tricks mixed in along the way. Let me know in the comments, how do you like to use the 140? How do you like to use the 250? And hey, don't forget to check out the user manual for even more details and cool information. And yeah, of course, be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so that you're notified of all new UA content. And I will see you in the next Spotlight.